Hey, what's going on, everyone? Welcome back to the channel. It's that time of year again. We're going to be doing the June predictions for the MLB playoffs. We're going to start off with the American League side, then we're going to do the National League side. I do this video every time right around the mids of June, do another one in August, and then we do the playoff predictions when it's time for the playoffs. This is usually one of the more popular videos, and I like doing it because we're still quite a ways out, and I have a chance to maybe make some bold predictions. I kind of went through it so far. I'm on the fence. I probably won't do the craziest of bold predictions, but otherwise, guys, we're going to jump into it. First and second, of course, are going to be who I think are going to be the tops in the league. And number two, not necessarily the second best record. You have to be a division leader to be number two. And number three is obviously going to be that third division. So when we're talking about the American League, it's a little bit unique. We'll get to that in a second. I got teams that I think are going to be in the hunt probably all the way to the stretch. For this side of the bracket, I think number 6 was pretty much the toughest out of the entire playoff picture for me to decide. And again, we'll get to that in a second. So let's just jump into it. I think just looking at this, the number one debate, I think, across the whole board here in the American League is who is going to be number one. I think if you're looking at the standings, maybe you think there's a couple other teams in there, but in my books, it's really a 2-team race, and it's both teams in the American League. I had to make a decision, and I do think the Baltimore Orioles are going to end up taking the American League East when all is said and done. I think overall, they just seem to have a little bit more depth. Maybe there's something to do with these young guys a little bit more fired up. On the other side of things, that does leave the New York Yankees. And I do think the New York Yankees are going to have the second best record in the American League. While their pitching has been pretty elite on top of it, Baltimore does have some bullpen issues that we've seen. I do expect Baltimore to address those issues. And that would mean that the New York Yankees are going to be number 4 on this list. And that's merely because if you're not a division leader, you're not in the top 3. So that kind of leaves that. And unfortunately for whoever this team is, that's pretty much how it's going to be. In my books, either got New York at number 1 or you got Baltimore, and then these two would just switch. Had to make a choice. I went with Baltimore. That leaves us up to number 2, and it's either going to be the American League West or the Central, of course. And I'm leaning towards the Central. I think based on the record so far, that is probably where most people are going to lean. There's only one team that's edging on the way to 600 in the West. But on the Central side, we've got a couple of teams that are really having great seasons so far. One of them is the Guardians, the other one being the Royals. I had to make a choice at this point, and this might be a little bit out there. A lot of people might not agree. I do think the Royals are going to find a way to cover this gap. We've only seen them really play each other twice now so far. We've seen a lot more of the Royals playing a lot of the tougher opponents. We've seen them play the Baltimore Orioles, for example, 6 times already. We've seen them play the Blue Jays a bunch of times, who's a team that we're going to talk about. And I do think that overall, it's going to be super tight, and that would leave the Guardians being on the outside looking in. And in that case, I do think the Guardians are a lock for the playoffs at this point. And unfortunately, if they're not winning their division, I think it makes it a sure in that they're going to be the number 5. So in this books, you can either swap these two, but I think at the end of the day, we're going to see an American League versus Central second place teams battling it out in 4th and 5th. Now, looking at number 3, I think this one's going to be pretty clear. Most people are going to be picking the same team to be the West leaders. I think Seattle has kind of created a gap between them and Texas from Houston. And I don't know if there's going to be, while there's a lot of runway, I don't know if the teams below them really have the depth and the streak that the Mariners have shown so far. Mariners, the rotation has been pretty elite. We've had nights where their offense is questionable at times. A lot of their guys not showing much offensive power, but at the same time, they have the record and the team in the pitching department that can really stop them from sliding like we've seen some of these other teams in the West do. I do think Seattle is going to probably get closer to 600 by the end of the season. They're going to have a chance to beat up on the lower teams in their own division as well. So that's going to definitely help in the overall grand scheme of their overall record. That leaves us to the number 6 seed. And this one was really tough for me. I have 4 teams here that I'm going to talk about. We're going to start off with my own Toronto Blue Jays. I do think this is one team that is going to be in the hunt. at the end of the day, I really wanted to put them number 6, but after doing a little bit more depth and looking at the schedule, and so far, I wasn't ready to do it. I think of everyone on this board, we've seen the worst possible performance from the Blue Jays that is probably possible. They can probably only go up from here. Their offense has just been absolutely atrocious. They're pretty much down there in the dumps and a lot of the numbers in there. On the pitching side and on the defensive side of the ball, they rank pretty high. And I think when it comes down to long-term longevity, they at least are going to pick up solid wins. They're probably going to be a little bit above 500 by the all said and done. Is that going to be enough to be the number 6 seed in the American League? I don't think so. I think you're going to have to be around 540, 550 to get that 6th seed. And that has me counting them out. And then that comes up to the World Series champions. And this team is another one that I wanted to put number 6. I think overall, if they were completely healthy, they would be there. But based on what we've seen, and they've just not been able to get a whole lot of things going. Again, it's injury related in my books, but they're slowly falling behind. The West, in my opinion, is going to be out of grabs. There's really only one spot, and if they don't go on some sort of a tear to really show that they got to get to that 550 spread, I don't think they are going to be able to do that. And with the Rangers, they're kind of running out of time, and we're seeing a lot of their older guys, like Semi and that, not having the amazing season that we're used to. Garcia, another one of those guys that is a little bit down in the dumps so far this season. They really need to see something pop out. I don't know if they are capable, and that's why I have them there. That leaves us in 2 spots, and I'm going to throw them both up here right now. I wasn't sure what to do, and honestly, I wore this hat for the main reason that I do think they are going to be the number 6 team. Boston, they've surprised me all season long, and looking into the numbers, the run differential really caught me off guard so far this season. We haven't seen them play the Yankees. I think they're starting the series against the Yankees this weekend. We haven't seen them play the Jays either. They haven't necessarily had crazy tests so far, but they've maintained a pretty good record against pretty good opponents along the whole way here. In the division, that's really where it's going to count. They'll possibly be the 3rd team. On the other side, we got 3rd team in the Central, so I think it's either going to be one or the other. In my books, it's either Minnesota or Boston. I had to make a choice. I ended up going with Boston. I think Minnesota, for me, so far, they haven't shown the consistency that you like to see. They've been one of the most streaky teams, and the fact that they've put together a couple of multiple 5 or more lost streaks this season does have me worried that when it comes go time in August and September, they go on one of those kind of runs, I don't know if they have to weather the storm. I don't think they can do it. Whereas Boston has at least avoided that, and I do think they've had the power so far. So there you have it. That's who I think. That's how I think the playoffs are going to break down, and then that just gets even more interesting as it goes on. In the first round, we do, of course, have the best of 3, and this is going to be tough. So the winner of the 4-5 will play number 1. The winner of 3-6 does play number 2. It's interesting because, like I talked about before, New York and Baltimore, in my books, are going to have the 2 best records. So if they do match up, and I do think that is going to be the case, Guardians have been in this spot before. In a best of 3, anything can happen. We've seen them play once already, best of 3, and the Yankees did have a little bit of an edge. I do think the Yankees overall are a little bit of a better team. But in a best of 3, do not count the Guardians out. They have the pitching, especially they've had some of these hot guys in their bat lineup as well that have been dominant in a best of 3. Very capable of doing it, but you got to do a prediction. Next up, we do have Seattle versus Boston, and this one's a little more interesting. I think these teams could match up super well. It's almost, in my books, going to be a battle of pitching versus hitting. However, we have seen some stars like Hoek pop up for Boston so far this season, and they have a lot of these younger guys that are pitching that I haven't seen and haven't had a chance to familiarize myself with so far this season. And I do kind of lean that that's going to be a little bit of an edge here. And this is a little crazy. I didn't really go too much. When I was planning this video, I planned who I was going to put in top 6, but from there, I'm kind of flying by the seat of my pants, just going with my gut. So it kind of creates this weird situation in the American League when you got the 2 top teams, they're facing off. This could very well be a World Series kind of matchup. And when you get down to it, you're in a best of 5. The Yankees are going to have Garrett Cole back. The Orioles in this exact same spot last year got swept by the Astros, and unfortunately, I just don't know if they have figured it out to be able to win in a best-of-5 situation. Both these teams, I mean, it could go either way. But I think when we're predicting a team with veterans, a team like the Yankees, a team that has been there, it's just destined to do it. It feels like in my gut that they are going to be the team to do it. And believe it or not, this was not planned whatsoever. I think we're going to have a team that probably goes 3 against Seattle. They're going to come into Kansas City, a very, very young team, very much similar to Baltimore in that aspect. But they do have a little bit of vets, but I think these teams match up very well. I don't believe we've seen them play each other yet this season. Now that I'm doing this video, I'm pretty excited to kind of see that. But I actually am leaning Boston to be able to win this series. So this is interesting. I've talked about it. So interesting. It doesn't feel like these two matching up should really be in this. And maybe it's a first round kind of matchup. But it kind of feels like Boston is setting themselves up to have what is possibly an easier schedule than if you were up in this bracket, which is just wild. So creating an ALCS, this is just blowing my mind. If you're in making it this far, leave a comment and let me know how crazy even predicting this as the ALCS at this point in the season. It's just crazy, right? Boston is on the edge. They might not even make the playoffs. The fact that I put them in number 6, probably a little bit crazy. But I'm not a Boston fan. If you're a fan of this channel and you're new here, you should know I am a Blue Jays fan at heart through and through. And if you are here, I try to be as unbiased as possible when I'm doing these kind of predictions. We do the power rankings every Sunday. Again, tune in, subscribe, all that fun stuff. That brings us to the best of 7 American League Championship. And I think when we get to here, we're going to see a preview of it this weekend, I think. But I don't think there will be too much of a debate. I think New York, the fact that their ALCS was here. Boston, of course, had a big, tough situation. So there I have it. Is this really out there? This isn't too out there of a prediction, but I think a lot of people, when they see this matchup, they're going to be leaning Baltimore, so I think maybe a little bit different. But guys, this is the playoffs. It's so hard to predict. At the very least, I'm going to get the first 6 wrong, right? And that's part of the fun of the game. Wait for me while we jump into the National League. There you have it, quick as magic right there, movie magic. We have the National League. Now this one, to me, was a little bit easier, at least to do for the first little bit here. I don't think there's any real question on who number 1 is going to be. Philadelphia Phillies, they have quite a bit of a lead already in the overall standings. And I don't really expect that to change. In my opinion, they're in the easiest division in the National League. Maybe not in terms of overall skill, but in terms of the difference between them and the rest of the team, it feels like the biggest gap. So they're at least going to beat up on Washington. They're going to beat up on the Mets. They're going to beat up on Marlins. And that gives them a little bit of advantage, in my opinion, over the other divisions. And that brings number 2, I think, again, not really a debate. These two, in my opinion, are pretty much on their way to being this way. I don't think there's going to be too much of a question. Dodgers, on paper, possibly the best team in the whole entire league. They do have a tougher division. They have 4 teams in there that are competing for a playoff spot. The only team out being the Rockies. And, Bats, Freeman. Bats, I could go on forever about this team, but, it seems like a pretty lock. They're not really performed super well this season. They've been averaging around 600 most of the season. It's a little bit of a surprise, but I think it's one of those, it's a marathon, not a sprint, and that seems to be where the Dodgers are at. That brings us to number 3 on the board, and I do think that they will continue to lead this division. This is a little bit tighter. This division is a little bit more competitive, of course, than the East, and I think the difference between Milwaukee and the rest of the division is a little bit tighter than the East and, of course, the West. But I do think Milwaukee has shown and demonstrated their lineup is lethal enough to be good, and their pitching is consistent enough that they are winning enough games. They do have a pretty big gap, but of course they have a lot of games against the rest of the division. Some of them are super hot as of late. We'll talk about some of them in a second. But yeah, I think that pretty much is a secure. For most people, I think predicting the playoffs at this point will have the exact same 3 here. But this is where it gets a little bit more dicey. I think for the rest of the board, number 4 is pretty sure, and there's no real debate in my books. I know there's a common guy out there that loves to say I overrate these guys, but I don't really see a better team in the National League than the Padres. They are competing in this West. They are flirting a little bit above 500, barely all season long. I do kind of expect them to eventually get to around 550 or so, whereas I do believe the rest of the teams in the National League have been flirting with 500, and most of them can't break 500 if they've tried, and it's been a super tight race, which brings it into a very interesting situation. We do have 5 and 6. I've narrowed it down to 5 teams for the last 2 spots. And guys, it was really tough. But I'm going to go with number 5. And it's going to be a repeat. It's going to be maybe a surprise for a lot of teams, a lot of people. I do think Arizona is starting to sort their way out. They've had a rough few months. But analytically, they've had a little bit of bad luck. But overall, I think comparing to the rest of the teams we're going to talk about, I do think they have the best rotation. I do think their lineup is pretty solid through and through. So I do think they match up very well in this situation and coming through the rest of the teams that we're going to talk about. I do think they are going to start winning a little bit more, and I do expect them to be one of those teams that finishes above 500. And that does bring us to the last spot. And I didn't really know who I was going to pick until I just got up here this moment. And I really am still having a lot of struggle doing it. And this might be another one that's way out in left field, but I am leaning to this being the number 6 team. And I don't know really why I'm leaning them over some of the other ones, but I do like their rotation a little bit. They have some strong. Sonny Gray is, in my opinion, one of the more elite guys. And when we're talking about pitching on these rest of these teams that we're going to be talking about, I do think they have a little bit of some magic going on with some of their younger guys coming up as well. They did go on a little bit of a hot streak there. Maybe it's a little bit more recency bias, but I think the Cardinals match up very well in their division, which I think is going to play a big part in making it into that number 6 spot. To get that number 6 spot, you're going to have to win in your division, and I do think the Cardinals are going to be capable of that. So I want to talk about this team first in the hunt, but I don't think they're going to make it, and it's going to be maybe a surprise that I'm putting them here. They're only 3.5 games up right now in that wild card spot. They've been just devastated by injuries over the past month and a half. And from here, we haven't seen a team that offensively can compete with the rest of the teams that I do have making the playoffs. They've lost a couple of pitching starters over the beginning of the season as well, and with that combination of things, I just can think that the Braves are going to continue to just struggle a little bit. By the end of the season, they will fall below 500 in my opinion, and they will be the one team missing out. That leaves us with 2 other teams that I think are going to be very tight. Like, these guys are going to still be in the hunt and very well could take those last 2 spots I talked about. We got the Cincinnati Reds, who are potentially the hottest team in the MLB right now. Arguably, I think they're 8-2 over their last 10, probably something like 14-6 over their last 20. I'm just kind of pulling that one out of thin air. They're the one team I do think can compete with the Cardinals for that last spot. That's what the 2 teams I was kind of flip-flopping on. I ended up going with the Cardinals. Very well could be the Reds. But yeah, I think the Reds just don't have the consistency, and we've seen some effort of getting that offensive going. Ellie De La Cruz, absolutely monster on the bases, but he needs to get on the base to make that impact. Pitching, I know they've had some pretty solid pitching this year, but in my, just as an outsider, I haven't watched them super closely. No one really stands out consistently to me. So maybe if I'm missing something, drop in the comments below. And that does leave in the hunt. And I didn't think I should even put them in the hunt because I kind of expect them to fall off a little bit, but they seem to be that team that always is around to the very end. So I'm going to assume that they're going to do it. I don't know. I wouldn't really predict them to make the playoffs. I think offensively they just aren't there. Their consistency has been there, though. So I wanted to give them at least a little bit of a shout out. The one mistake I didn't do was change my hat. I should have changed my hat, and I was going to do it for the National League, but I completely forgot. Otherwise, I probably would have wore a Giants hat. So there you have it. Those are the teams I kind of see the playoff picture in the National League. Now, let's look at the fun stuff. So we got these 2 teams matching up in a best of 3. Remember, it's a best of 3. Anything can go. Do I want to get a little greasy and pick St. Louis? Deep down inside, I do. But I know Milwaukee is such a team that's built for these kind of series in the past, and in the past, they've been able to do it. So I do think that's going to pull through. We've seen this matchup so many times, it feels like, over the past number of years. Maybe I'm jumbling it a bit with my predictions of it happening, but it feels like it's happened a lot. And same on the other side, we've seen San Diego and Philly match up a lot. But I do think Arizona is going to continue to kind of build off the momentum that gets them to the number 5 spot in the first place. And based on that, I do think they have a team that matches up very well against San Diego bats-wise. And I do give them a pretty big edge in the pitching department over San Diego. So I do think they end up coming out there. And then we get to see a rematch here of the NLCS from last year. And we get to see the Dodgers versus Milwaukee. And I don't think it, guys. Milwaukee, you've had a pretty great season. I don't know if you can match up against the big boys. The top 5 in my power rankings have been pretty consistent for the majority of the season. Milwaukee has flirted with it. They haven't really broken through because every time they get somewhat close, they kind of stumble, and I do kind of think that's going to be the same. And at best of 5, I think the Dodgers just going to be really hard fought for Milwaukee to take 3 of 5 against the Dodgers, and that's why I'm leaning. And then on the same side of things, Arizona, you had a miracle last year to make it all the way to the World Series in my books. And to get back to this point, based on the start you've had, that's going to be a win on its own. But I do think Philadelphia is going to get their revenge, and that will be the case. Now, this brings up a National League. Philadelphia has been flirting with 700 for a long, long time on the season, but it's really hard for me to predict them to win in this matchup. And the main reason behind that is I haven't seen Philly play a whole lot of teams above 500. Is that their fault? Not really. The National League doesn't really bring a lot of 500 teams to the forefront. We're going to see a fun series this weekend against Baltimore and Philadelphia. We might get a better idea of what Philadelphia is all about. We've seen the Dodgers play a lot of tougher opponents. They're 500 a lot of the times against teams like San Diego and other teams that are in that department. They haven't done anything to really blow us away. They played the Yankees recently and won 2 out of the 3 there, right? But it's tight. And at this point, I do have to predict the Dodgers to win. I just think based on that, these two teams are going to match up amazingly. I do think the Dodgers have that star power a little slightly better, I should say, maybe. But Philadelphia at the same time, their star power is elite as well. This one will probably be one of the best series. I would hope to see it go 7. That would be fun to watch. And that would bring us to have a World Series. This seems a little bit of a cop-out to have the Yankees versus Dodgers as a World Series. This was not planned, but just kind of up here talking about it. This is what I get. And at this point, I do think the Dodgers are the better team. So I will have to say Dodgers winning the World Series in June 2024. Will they do it in October? That's my prediction. What do you guys think? Let me know in the comments below. Where am I just crazy? What team did I even leave off in the hunt? I think on the American League side, there's not really anyone to talk about. Maybe the Tigers, but on this side, we have Pirates, we have Cubs, we have other teams that potentially could be in the hunt. Let me know what you guys think. Is there anyone I just completely neglected that would possibly make the playoffs? Thanks for watching, guys. Hopefully you liked it, and hopefully you don't go too hard on me in this prediction, because again, it's a prediction. I'm never right. It's fun, and I hope you guys liked it. Thanks for watching. Peace out.